To our first QI Power Hour after our 2-month summer break. We hope everyone had an enjoyable, safe, and restful summer. I also want to express a special welcome to those of you joining QI Power Hour for your very first time. My name is Deborah Wright, and I'm the Executive Director of Learning and Innovation at the Health Quality Council here in Saskatchewan. For those of you who may not know, QI Power Hour is a free monthly WebEx offering hosted by the Saskatchewan Health Quality Council that provides an opportunity for colleagues across healthcare as well as other industries to hear from local and national improvement experts on a variety of continuous quality improvement related topics. So just a reminder that you can also access recordings and presentations from some of our past sessions on demand at any time on the Health Quality Council website found at hqc.sk.ca. In addition to representation from all of our 13 health regions here in the province, we've also seen participation continue to grow and engage other healthcare agencies as well as other organizations within Saskatchewan with a special interest in quality improvement. Excitingly, we've also begun to see that spread into other organizations across Canada and further abroad. Again, I want to welcome everyone to QI Power Hour, and I'll now hand it over to Chelsea Schwartz to go over some of the technical functions of today's webinar.
Great, thanks, Deb. So up first, we want to get everyone on the line involved. So what we're going to try out first is this annotation function. So some of you may be familiar with this. If not, I'll encourage you to select the pen icon at the top left-hand side of your screen. You'll see that circled here in red. And then the arrow icon. And what we're going to use this for in our first activity here is I'd like you to tell us where you're joining us from. So if you select the arrow icon, thanks, Melanie, HQC, we see some perfect. You guys are well practiced in this. So we have a few folks joining, quite a few folks joining from within the province, but I also see some participation from Calgary as well as BC. Oh, fantastic. Welcome from our new participants in Newfoundland. Well, thanks, folks. Glad to hear everyone is A, able to hear me, and B, comfortable using the annotation function. So thanks, everyone. We also want to call out the opportunity for you to use the chat function throughout the presentation. So we really encourage you to be interactive during today's session. So you'll be able to access the chat function by clicking on the chat icon at the top right-hand side of your screen there. We do invite you to share your comments with everyone so that everyone can build on the conversation that's happening. We'll also have some dedicated Q&A time at the end of today's session. So we'll welcome you to pose your questions throughout the session, and we'll moderate them and feed them to Paul during the Q&A session. So if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, we'll welcome you to message anyone who has HQC behind their name, and they should be able to help you out. So another exciting feature of today's presentation is that we'll be hosting our first HQC tweet chat following our session with Paul this morning. So this is scheduled to happen immediately following the QI Power Hour from 10:30 to 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. So for those of you who are new to tweet chat, essentially it's a live Twitter event, and all you need to do is tweet during the designated time using the conversation hashtag QI Power Hour, as you see on your screen here. So feel free to follow the conversation by searching the hashtag. There will be several questions posed to guide the tweet chat discussion. So with that, I'm delighted to welcome our guest speaker for today's session, Paul Plsek. Paul is an internationally recognized advisor on innovation, creativity, and the leadership of change in complex systems. He's an engineer by training, and in addition to his writing and consulting work, he serves as the Chair of Innovation at Virginia Mason Medical Center in Seattle, Innovator-in-Residence at MedStar Health in Washington, D.C., and Senior Visiting Fellow on Innovation and Complexity at Ko-Awatia in New Zealand. Paul, I'll have to get you to unbutcher that, sorry. His latest book, Accelerating Healthcare Transformation with Lean and Innovation, The Virginia Mason Experience, was awarded the Shingo Prize for Research and Operational Excellence in 2014. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Chelsea, and hello to everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. It's going to be even more my pleasure to be up in Saskatchewan next week for 3 days. So I hope perhaps to meet some of you face to face at some of those sessions. So it's Ko-Awatia, and in the native language of the Maori, that means the rising sun. And so the innovation lab in health care in New Zealand is called Ko-Awatia, the rising of the sun. I should add a little bit to my introduction to point out that I'm an engineer by background, and I spent a lot of time learning about quality improvement and working in a manufacturing kind of environment with AT&T, the telephone company in the United States. I left there in the mid-1980s, went off on my own as a consultant, met some physicians in Boston in the U.S. In the late 80s, Dr. Donald Berwick, some of you may be familiar with Don, and what we created, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. The idea was to take industrial quality methods and bring them into healthcare. This work on creativity and innovation really is an outgrowth of that. I found that I could teach people how to analyze problems, how to see, even to find the root cause of a problem. But sometimes they couldn't come up with a different way of doing it. They couldn't come up with another way. They couldn't come up with an idea. And so I got very interested in where do ideas come from. So this is this little brief kind of 30 minutes of input is about innovation, and innovation begins with an idea. And because I'm an engineer, this is creative thinking for serious people. So I hope you'll enjoy. And Chelsea and Deborah, I'm assuming you're going to monitor the chat function. I've got too much going on here to be able to read anything in the chat window. So if there's anything that you need to stop me on, just come in on audio and stop me and raise a question or whatever else. We can play it by ear. I'll trust your judgment. Okay. What Deborah and Chelsea asked me to do was to, in kind of 30 minutes, teach you something that would allow you to understand the difference between everyday thinking and creative thinking, and then how does that difference in the way we think day by day versus creative thinking, how does that translate into tools that you might be able to use for yourself, but more importantly with groups that you're trying to work with. Why do we care about creative thinking? Well, because innovation is driving progress across a lot of industries. It doesn't matter what you think of these days. If you're as old as I am, I'm 62. I've seen a lot of innovation driving change in industries. You used to have to go to a theater to watch a movie, and then they put them on DVDs, but you used to have to buy the DVDs, and then Blockbuster came up with the notion of renting the DVDs. And now you don't need the DVD. You go to Netflix and you download it. Whether it's telecommunications or banking or taxi services or healthcare services. Gosh, you used to have to do surgery. You had to make an incision somewhere, right? Well, not necessarily. Lots of surgeries are now being done through natural openings in the body, the mouth, the nose, others. And telehealth, of course, is another innovation. You don't have to even be in the same room with the doctor to be treated by a doctor. So innovation is the production of creative ideas followed up by some deliberate effort to implement the ideas. I'm going to be talking about ideas today, and I won't touch on the second half of that, but a creative idea by itself has no value. You have to do something to put it into practice. I like what the Virginia Mason folks have done. They've taken my overly wordy definition and gotten it down to 3 words. That's kind of the essence of lean, isn't it? Directed creativity, implemented. That's what innovation is. Well, to understand about ideas, you have to understand about thinking. And to understand about thinking, I want to introduce you to a small piece of music. This is a Canadian artist. I hope you'll recognize the artist. Listen to this song. It's only a 20-second or so snippet. Listen to this song and see if you can name the artist. Oops, just a minute. I'm trying to get the song to come up. There we go. So listen to this, see if you can name the artist, name the song, and listen to the words, because I'm going to ask you a question about it afterwards. Here we go. Yeah, you probably know the artist and know the song, Alanis Morissette, and Ironic. The question that I want to ask you about it, if I can get the slides to come back. Here we go. There we go. It's a little slow acting here on this end. The question that I want to ask you about is, what's the opposite of irony? What's the antonym of irony? Think about that for a minute. You got something in mind? It's a tough question. What's the opposite of irony? Wrinkly. You get it? You see, the way we think is dependent upon the context that we find ourselves in. Thank you for tech support adding the ha 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 to the chat there. That actually popped up on my screen. I put you in a context. I played you Alanis Morissette's song. I said, listen to it closely. I want to ask you a question. This is important. And so you were in the context of thinking of irony in the way that she was describing it. If I had shown you the picture of a wrinkled shirt with an iron on an ironing board, and I asked you what's the opposite of irony, you would have said wrinkly. It would have been obvious. My point is that thinking depends on the context we're in. What we think about, the way our mind deals with the overwhelming amount of possibilities in every situation, is it takes the situation we're in and says, well, here's how we usually think in this situation. Edward deBono, who's one of the most prolific writers in the creativity literature, describes the way your mind thinks with this little model here, which I think is a great one. He says your mind processes language the way a rugged landscape processes rainwater. Rain falls randomly on a landscape, but it gets organized into streams at the bottoms of valleys. He says your mind is that way, but it's listening to the sound of language. And even when you're just thinking a word, those random sounds get organized into a stream of thought. So on that slide there, on the left-hand side, the stream of thinking. Suppose I said we're going to build a new primary care clinic in the community. Well, you know exactly what I was talking about, right? It's a building. It has a parking lot. You come in. There has to be a door. The first person you'll see is a receptionist. There has to be a waiting room. You'll be eventually called back. You know exactly what I'm talking about when I utter the sounds clinic. Well, take that middle valley there. Suppose I said we were going to build a new fast food restaurant in the community. What would you think of? Well, you might think of ordering off the menu. You might think of a drive-through. You might think, oh yeah, you're going to have a drive-through in that. I'm going to skip over this and come back to it. What we just did, if we put those two things together, if we put together the drive-through in a fast food restaurant with our new clinic, we might have a new way of offering services. So the Virginia Mason Medical Center has a drive-through flu shot clinic that they offer seasonally. People drive their cars through, they roll the window down, they fill in some paperwork, they get the flu jab, and they drive off. It's good, it's safe, it's been tested, but you don't normally think of a drive-through window in a hospital or a clinic. That jump in your mind from one valley of thinking to another valley of thinking is a creative act. And you might, when you have that new idea, or when you hear that new idea in a meeting, laugh at it. It's actually the basis of humor. So I'll go back to the slide that I skipped and come through. So one of my favorite comics is a guy named Stephen Wright. He tells very dry, deadpan jokes. And it's a great illustration of this mental valleys that we have and the connecting and the laughter that comes out. Stephen Wright says, I used to work in a factory where they make fire hydrants. The good comic always pauses a minute to let your mind kind of quickly grab a mental image of that. Yeah, it's a dirty place, it's manual labor, the pay is probably low, it's not a great job. I used to work in the factory where they make fire hydrants, but I quit. Another comic pause. So you can imagine all the logical reasons for quitting a hard work job like that. I used to work in the factory where they make fire hydrants, but I quit. They wouldn't let you park anywhere near the place. You see, a good joke does that jump over. It starts you down one path, and the comic lets your mind kind of settle into the usual traditional thinking, and then there's a jump to something else. That jump makes sense. Yes, you can't. I know you can't park near a parking meter, a fire hydrant rather. You can't park near a fire hydrant. But I didn't think about the factory where they make the fire hydrants. You wouldn't be able to park anywhere near to it. You laugh. One of the most reliable indicators of a creative idea in a meeting or as you're talking to people is the fact that someone laughs at it the first time they hear it. That drive-through flu shot window at Virginia Mason was laughed at when it was proposed. But if you take those ideas that you laugh at and you think, well, hang on, how could we do something like that? How could that be useful? What would that look like? What would we have to do? You might have an innovation. Now, this innovation isn't going to change the world, but it's a process innovation. It makes the process of getting a flu jab a lot easier. They can process through a boatload of people in a very short period of time in this drive-through window. It makes things better. So that's point number one, that natural thinking relies on the context that you're in, and it limits your thinking. I'm designing a hospital, or I'm trying to get patients to flow through a clinic. Let me think about that the way I usually think about it. Creative thinking requires that you get up and jump around and go somewhere else in your mind to see what you can connect. Another point about creativity and about natural thinking versus creative thinking is illustrated in this little puzzle here. Take a moment just to either jot it down on a piece of paper in front of you, or see if you can just do it with your mind, kind of doing things. Connect all 9 of these dots with just 4 straight lines without lifting your pencil off the paper once you start. In other words, you have to stay in connection with the paper the whole time. See if you can do it. When I do this in a physical workshop, I get to ask how many people have an answer, and only a few hands up, and then I say, how many people have seen this before but you forgot the answer? And lots of people raise their hands. Yeah. And then I ask, how many people could do this if I gave you 5 lines? And nearly everybody raises their hands. This is a budget problem. I don't have enough budget of lines to connect all these dots. Because you see, I start here and I start going 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, see, I need an extra line. 1. Let me try again. Is another PDSA cycle. Nope. You see, I need another line. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, see, now I need 6 lines to connect all these dots. You can work with this puzzle and convince yourself that there simply isn't enough resource, enough lines to connect all 9 dots. But in fact, there is. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. What do you have to do to solve this puzzle? You have to think outside the box. It's a trite phrase, but it actually comes from this puzzle, which comes from the Gestalt psychology research of Carl Duncker. Duncker was one of the fathers of Gestalt psychology, that kind of aha sense that you get when you finally realize something. And Duncker would make up puzzles like this and give them to research subjects, and he would watch how the mind became fixated on a certain approach and literally could not see an alternative approach until it was shown to them. And when it was shown to them, they would go, oh. And he actually coined the phrase in a paper about this research. He coined the phrase "think outside the box." That's where the phrase comes from. The most important question about this is, where is the box? What box are you talking about? You see, what happens is that you look at those dots, they're in a square configuration, and your mind put a box around it. And then you learn somewhere along in life that when you have a pencil or a coloring instrument in your hand, you're supposed to stay inside the lines. You know, you give a picture of a cow to a 2-year-old and a purple crayon, and they just go all around it. And then we teach them the right way to do it. You're supposed to stay inside the lines. And so here you are, whatever age you are, acting out a rule that you learned when you were 2 or 3 years old. You put a box around it, and you constrained yourself to being inside the box. No one said you had to do that. Your mind puts rules and constraints on things, and then makes it impossible for you to see an alternative. Well, the minister was so pleased that we were able to join the 9 dots with 4 lines that they've asked in next year's budget, can we reduce it by 25% and connect all 9 dots with just 3 straight lines? See if you can do that. All right, I'll put you out of your misery. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Piece of cake. What were you trying to do? Most people are trying to draw through the middle of the dots, or they put the dots on paper. I've been calling them dots, and they put them down as really tiny little dots. Who said that? Who said it had to go through the middle? Who said the dot had to be tiny? It's all these constraints and these rules that we put on things that aren't there. Well, we're so pleased that we were able to do it with 3 lines. Are there ways to do it with just 1 straight line? Turns out there's dozens of ways of doing it. Who said you had to have a sharp pencil? I'll use a paintbrush. I'm going to take the 3 dots on one side, fold them over onto the middle, and the 3 dots on the other side and fold them onto the middle, and I'll draw my line through it. Who said the dots had to stay in that configuration? I'll draw my dot in a straight line and draw a straight line through it. Who said the dots had to be that size? I'll make the dots so big that they overlap, and now I don't even need a line to join them. They're already touching. You see that? It starts off with a puzzle, with a challenge that you think you can't solve, and it's a resource constraint, but it really isn't a resource constraint. It's a thinking constraint. Now, I have no doubt that there are many aspects of our healthcare systems around the world that need more resources. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that some of the times we don't use our resources the best we can because we put all these rules and conditions around it, and then we wonder why we can't think of another way of doing things. These rules and constraints become just so natural. It's like the fish in water. Fish isn't really all that conscious of being in water. That's just the natural environment that they're in. The rules and things that we put around things make it hard for us to imagine any other way. And of course there are rules. There's law and legislation and regulation and all sorts of things. But there aren't as many rules as you think there are. There's often just traditions, just things that we've always done it this way. And so we keep thinking we have to keep doing it that way just because we've always done it that way. If you want to be creative, think outside your context and think outside the box of the rules. If you can't solve a problem, it's because you're playing by the rules. Break the rules. Pablo Picasso said, learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. Of course, don't do anything illegal. There are real rules. But look at what's going on and say, do we really have to do it that way? I know we've always done it that way, but does it have to be that way? Does the technology enable us to do something different at this point in time? Well, what I'm trying to illustrate with you, and I'll summarize here, natural thinking is the kind of thinking that we do that's automatic. I'm in this context, I've been trained, I've learned how to do this, I just want to do the same thing over and over again. And that's fine as long as it's working. If there's a problem, and we want to do something different, we have to practice attention, escape, and movement. We have to pay attention to the ways we're thinking, to the assumptions that we're making, to the rules that we seem to be following. We have to escape the context. Don't think like a doctor or a nurse or an administrator. Think like a banker or a school bus driver or a kindergarten teacher. And then we have to move. We have to play imaginatively. We have to make sure that we're not just letting laughter at an idea kill an idea, because creative ideas are often laughed at the first time they're heard. If you want to think creatively, if you want to be innovative, if you think creatively, you have to practice attention, escape, and movement. And that often means slowing down a little bit in your thinking. Well, let me now talk about then, so if that's natural thinking and creative thinking, what are some tools that we might be able to use with our teams or just ourselves? And these things work just as well with your family, with social groups. There's nothing magical about these things in terms of it can only be used in a quality improvement or performance improvement kind of environment. One of them is something called mental benchmarking. In this case, you select another business or industry at random or purposefully. You think about how they would approach the general problem, and you borrow some concepts. That example of the drive-through flu clinic at Virginia Mason is an example of going to the industry of the fast food restaurant, borrowing a concept, the drive-through, and then thinking, how can I apply drive-through to our new clinic? It doesn't have to be an industry. It could be another person. How would a banker look at this? How would an airline pilot look at this? In fact, it doesn't even have to be another kind of person or industry. It can just be a word. I was working with a physician, a trauma surgeon, who is looking for some new innovative ways to stop the bleeding. He says, our only thing we can do when someone comes in with massive bleeding is to apply a tourniquet of some sort. There's been incremental improvements on those things, but sometimes that just doesn't do the trick. It isn't fast enough. We started thinking in broad sorts of ways, and we were just throwing words out. And one of the words that came up, I have a deck of cards that you can kind of shuffle when you throw a card out. One of the cards came out as glue. Oh, how could you put glue on it? He says, well, no, if you put glue on it, the pressure from the blood vessel would just shoot the glue out. Then we started thinking about epoxy. Remember epoxy? It's two tubes. You put one thing down and then you combine it with the other. That led to a whole bunch of discussion about could you inject something into the bloodstream that was non-toxic and then put another chemical at the wound, and when the stuff in the bloodstream met up with the chemical that was at the wound, it would instantly seal. We're actually working with some technologists to see if we can do something like that. The point is, get out of your context. Get out of your context. Another tool, if normal thinking relies on rules that we've learned in things, is a tool called break the rules. Identify the current rules and assumptions in what you're doing, in the process of what you're doing, or whatever else it is, and then just say, what if that rule didn't exist? How can we break that rule? How can we make something magically appear or substitute some new rule or assumption and see where that might lead us? There's numerous possibilities here. At the Virginia Mason and at other clients that I work with, they often use the break the rules tool after they draw a process map. They go through each step in the process and say, what are the rules or the traditions or the assumptions that make us do this step? So, for example, a standard flow in a primary care clinic, the patient arrives, they're at the reception desk, and you just ask the question, wait a minute, why did they have to stop at the reception desk? What if we didn't have a reception desk? What if it was actually illegal to have a reception desk? What would we do? Oh, we'd find some other way for them to register their presence So how else could they register their presence? Wow, that could be a kiosk. They could send us a text message when they get into the parking lot and say, I'm here, and we can get the exam room ready for them because we know that they're coming. Just take a process map and challenge each and every step and say, why does that have to be there? I know it's always been there, but does it have to be there? Break the rules, break the assumptions. A third approach that you might try when you're trying to come up with creative ideas is what's called stepping stones. Start off with a wild proposition and see where it might lead you. Necessity is the mother of invention. This actually comes out often in healthcare when there's a crisis of some sort and we have to do without something. It's amazing how inventive and creative people can be in healthcare when there's a real crisis. There's a 15-car pileup out on the motorway, and everybody's showing up at the A&E, the ED at the same time. Invent a crisis just to talk about it and say, what would we do? A good example of this is the emergency department at the Virginia Mason in Seattle. They were moving to a new building, and the architects had designed the emergency department, but it was too big. The footprint was too big for the smaller building. We have to do emergency services in a smaller space. So we actually put a team in action, and we said the only space you have is the size of a small conference room, but you have to deliver the service of intaking patients who arrive in an unscheduled way. They ended up designing a really incredible flow process by which the first person you see when you come into the ED is a clinically trained person who then is able to triage you into one of three tracks. One track is into a nurse-led protocol. You're having a breathing incident or you need a bandage on something. So you move in and out rather quickly. Another track is picks up on the evidence that there's a lot of evidence to point out that the first clinically trained person who sees a person in the ED with high degree of accuracy pretty much knows whether this is someone that needs to be admitted or someone who's likely to go home. Well, if we have a sense that they need to be admitted, let's bring them to a holding area, make sure we have a bed available upstairs in the hospital, and let's move them through. They don't do any workups in the ED anymore. The third track are people who really need ED services, but that can be delivered in a much smaller way. But that came about by challenging them to think about how would they do it if they only had a conference room. Really forcing you to go to an extreme case often causes you to think of new things that you wouldn't have thought of before. It's all about attention, escape, and movement. In the mental benchmarking thing, you pay attention to how other industries or other people do it. You first escape your own industry. You go to another one and say, how do they do it? And you move to say, how can I put these pieces together? In the Breaking the Rules tool, you start by paying attention to each little step and trying to figure out what's the assumptions, the rules that we're following. Let's escape those one by one, and let's move to come up with something new. In the Stepping Stones tool, you start off by escaping in a big way. Now, we don't want an emergency department that's 10% smaller. We want one that fits in the size of a conference room. That strong escape causes you to pay attention to what's really important here, and now I can move and generate ideas. If you're working then with people and you want them to be creative and innovative, don't tell them your ideas. I think it's a bad thing to go in and tell people, oh, I've just had this great creative idea. Why? Because as soon as you say it, they're going to laugh at you. And then they're going to dismiss you, and then there you are. Lead them on a journey. Take them through some of these tools and let them generate their own creative ideas. Resist the urge to say, oh, I've already thought of that. Just say, oh, it's a fabulous idea. Let's try that out. And get quickly into the small tests of change. Here's where you can use your creative ideas and your performance improvement and CQI quality improvement kinds of training to put those ideas into practice. Once people see something, they can think of more ways of using it or ways of making it better. But also understand that in the end, not everybody wants to think creatively. The teacher will appear when the student is ready. Not everyone's ready, and it's not your fault. It's not your job. If you really need innovation, measurement is an important part of this, to say the same old way is just not getting us anywhere. We have to think of something different. Let's spend some time seeing if we can think of something different. So I hope that gives you a sense of how we think normally and how we think in creative thinking, and I hope you can see some of those tools that you might be able to use. I should point out the final slide here, which you'll be able to download, has a link. I'm sorry, it's such a long link. This is a book that I and some others wrote for the National Health Service in England on thinking differently. It's got lots of tools and lots of things in it. I would just summarize by saying we all have our mental valleys and our learned rules. It's good. It's how we get by day, how we become efficient in what we're doing. Context and training kind of defines that and defines the selection of thoughts that we use to try to solve problems. Almost no one thinks they're limiting their thinking. They think they're just being logical. If you want to think differently, you have to pay attention, escape, and move. Don't tell others about your creative ideas. Lead them on a process that causes them to generate their own ideas. Get to prototyping as quickly as you can. Try it out. Make it, see what works, because you never know until you actually put it into practice. And understand that not all of your colleagues are going to be ready to think differently. So with that, I'll leave this slide up in case anybody wants to copy down the download thing, or you will have these slides available to you to download afterwards, and you can see that. Let me turn the mic or the presentation or get Chelsea to take it over and oh, the poll questions is being asked. Yes, let's do the poll questions. Chelsea or Deborah, you want to jump in here?
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. So I'm just going to let folks know kind of the logistics of if you want to pose your question on the phone line. You'll notice if you go under the participant menu and you locate your name, if you scroll over, you'll see that you have a little microphone icon. So we'll just ask you to click that microphone once to unmute your line, and then you can pose your question that way. Or alternately, if you find it easier or less daunting perhaps, feel free to pose your question using the chat function as well.
Great, thanks, Chelsea. So I'm just going to see if anyone on the line, any courageous souls who might want to unmute if they have any questions for Paul. And as Chelsea mentioned, we're also monitoring chat if you'd like to pose a question through that as well. So I'll just pause for a moment. Otherwise, I know we've got some questions here that we'd like to ask. Okay. So, Paul, thank you so much for your introduction into creativity and innovation. And I'm kind of grounded back into the definition that you shared that Virginia Mason had sort of brought it down to 3 words: directed, creativity, implemented. And when I read that very short sentence, I can't help but think about sort of the difficulty in achieving both. And so I guess one of my questions is where do you start? So I know that we all can identify opportunities, generate ideas, and we know that many of the ideas that are most powerful are those that are closest to the front line. But we also know innovation and the implementation of new things is hard work and sometimes needs champions at different levels within a system to make it happen. So just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I'm starting to see healthcare organizations, and I think this is borrowed from manufacturing organizations, Toyota and others, making a distinction between kind of small process innovations where it's improvement in daily work. The individual worker can try out a new way of doing things in a PDSA cycle, and then that idea, if it works, if it's shown to work, gets shared with other workers, and they can start to adapt it. You might even make it standard work at some point. I'm finding people using the word minovations, like a minnow or a mini innovation. At that higher level that you're just talking about, where you're trying to do some organizational stuff, and it's going to require multiple disciplines, multiple departments, multiple people involved. The best place to try to do something creative and innovative is on a problem that you've already been around the loop 4 or 5 times on. And I asked this question. I've got a picture. It's not in this deck. It's a picture of 2 people walking in a forest, and you're looking at them down in a helicopter, and there's a break in the path, and one path leads to a glorious sunrise, but it's kind of overgrown with trees and stickers and bushes and things, and the other path is a path that's well worn, well trodden, but it's a path that goes around in a great big circle. And I ask people, have you ever had this experience? You're sitting in a meeting and you think to yourself, hang on, wasn't I in this meeting last year, or 18 months ago, or 6 months ago? It's a different room, it's different people, but it's the same problem. Take some of those things that you've already had 5 task forces to look at X, and they just keep coming up with the same old ideas, or the ideas they come up with have not really addressed the issues. Take some of those with some frustration and say, why don't we just try, seeing if we can come up with some radically different ways of approaching this. Let's see if we can break the rules. Let's see if we can think about how other people might think about this and bring in some of that insight. Let's exaggerate the things that we have, the space or the resources, and see what we would do in a real crisis. Just try it on something. I find that frustrated people are often the most open to thinking differently, because they know they've been around this 5 or 6 times, and they don't want to do it again.
Great, thanks, Paul. I do have a question from Brenna Murray, who's joining us from the University of Calgary, and it kind of relates to just as you were finishing your last point. Wondering if are there always going to be people who will be resistant, and how do you sway their way of thinking? So you talked a little bit about sometimes our most frustrated folks are the ones that might help us move further faster, but your thoughts on, do we always have some resistors, and how best to kind of move them forward?
Yeah, there's the classic work in this is from Everett Rogers, who wrote a book in the 60s called The Diffusion of Innovation. And he was studying not so much innovation, but he was studying the ways that ideas spread. And he actually coined a lot of phrases that we use, things like laggards and early adopters and things like that. That's all language that he saw. And every idea, every innovation, every change that he studied, he found there were some people who would jump on board really quickly, other people who would kind of sit on the fence to wait to see how it's going to turn out before they decide to get on board, and then there was always some people who were the last ones to get on board, or perhaps would never get on board. It wasn't always the same people all the time, and this is really important. We over-label people sometimes. We say, oh, that doctor or that nurse or that if you're not in healthcare, that school teacher or that university professor or that bank teller or whatever industry you're in, that person is just resistant to change. And it's probably not true. All of us change all the time on our own terms, for our own reasons, based on our own values. And it really is understanding that process. How do people evaluate whether they want to get involved in something? One of the great things about healthcare, to tie into this specific audience, is the sense of values that people who are attracted to work in the healthcare sector often bring to it. It may be that it's not so much that they're resistant to change, they just don't believe that the change that you're proposing is going to do something that they consider to be valuable. Do you understand that? You have to understand, what do they value? And they may value the comfort and control of doing it the way they've always done it. But that's a very reasonable point of view. It says, yes, I've always done it this way. It's safe. I'm not going to harm anybody. If you make me do something completely different, I might hurt somebody. And I'm a nurse. I didn't start to be a nurse in order to hurt people. You're going to have to deal with that. And if people with a strong comfort value, the change needs to be eased in very slowly and carefully. Stand by their side and work with them, you know, and say, you know, I've got you. I've got your back. I've got your hand. I'm with you. Somebody else has an altruism value. They want to do good for society, and they don't see how your idea is going to benefit the less fortunate. They think you're carving out some idea, some innovative idea that's only going to be accessible to people with college educations or with technology at hand. So it's important to understand the source of the resistance and work with it. Yes, there'll always be Everett Rogers' bell curve of some people jumping on board really quickly, other people waiting to see how it's going to turn out, and then some people at the end. That's just natural human behavior. It's people behaving humanly, and it'll always be there.
Great. Thanks, Paul. We do have another question from Dr. Dennis Kendall. With respect to one of your points around not telling others your innovative ideas, he's wondering how that would work when care processes are often team-based and maybe one person isn't necessarily in a position to implement change without that whole team. Any reflections on that?
Yeah. So see, I would say, perhaps I painted it with too harsh a brush. Choose the people you're going to tell your idea to. So to pick up on the last question, telling your idea to someone who's very powerful, who is likely to not think it's a very good idea, is just not very useful. Wait and get more people on your side. Talk to people who are likely to be friendly to your idea, who are likely to work with you and create a little bit of buzz. Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, if you did that, then you could do this. And oh, what if we did this and this and that? So find friendly people first who will brainstorm and play with you to further develop the idea. And then as you need to introduce the idea broader, get yourself hooked into an improvement team or a task force on this topic, and throw some of these notions out. I wonder how if we weren't in healthcare, but we were in the airline industry, I wonder how we would approach a similar problem. Just asking questions and getting people's minds in different gears, so that they're breaking some of the rules, maybe even pointing out a rule. Why do we always have to have a receptionist in every clinic? What's the essence of the job that they're doing? And what would we do if, like, all the receptionists quit? What would we what would we do? Asking questions like that engages people in thinking, and then it becomes their idea, not yours. There's a collective sense of, oh, I was in that meeting, we thought about this thing here, and now I'm a bit more excited about it than, oh, we heard Dr. So-and-so's ideas. Dr. So-and-so is always coming up with these crazy ideas. We can't possibly do that. So it's just being careful about proclaiming your idea, understanding that the natural reaction to a truly creative idea is surprise or laughter, and understanding that there will always only be a small number of people who are willing to be the first movers, the first goers on an idea. You want to identify them and work with them. I hope that helps.
Great. Thanks, Paul. We have had another question typed into chat that's just wondering about, do you think that we give up on our problems too quickly?
Oh, sure. Yeah. There's always another way. We just haven't thought of it yet. And we may have thought of it yet, and the technology or the ability to do it might not be there yet, but we could get close to it. Yeah, I think we give up on problems way too soon. The creative people are optimistic. they always believe there's got to be another way. Let's keep thinking about it. Let's keep playing with it. There's got to be something we can do. Yeah, so don't give up on problems too soon. And that's what happens when we get to, this is the 5th task force on the XYZ pathway or something, because the first 4 have given up on it, and it's not gotten any better, but it's still a problem we have to do something about. So now we have the 5th task force. Well, let's make this the last task force on that pathway. Let's actually really keep working on it until we've actually solved it.
Great. Thanks, Paul. There was a comment earlier in the chat about, healthcare being a system that's sort of rooted in fear of harming patients, because we certainly want our system to be patient first and safe. So I'm wondering about your advice maybe of how do we navigate innovation in a system that maybe is rooted in the fear of harm, for particularly our patients.
Well, first off, it's let's have a realistic assessment of the potential for harm. So, with a lot of patient flow problems or access to care and those kinds of things, the chance of clinically harming someone is a classic example. Someone says let's have a thing where there's really 5 questions that we ask patients when they come in with these symptoms, and if they answer yes to 3 out of the 5 questions, the first line of therapy is to do X. But we do that in a physical examination. Someone says, well, why can't they go on the internet and just type in the answers to those questions, hit some radio buttons, and we'll order the therapy for them. We're going to try. If they're going to lie to us, they're going to lie to our face. It's the same. The risk is the same in both cases. Yeah, there's some body language and things like that you might be able to pick up, but I don't find a lot of people are that astute at doing that anyway. So my point is, let's be realistic about the chance of harm. Let's don't let the you might harm someone be the kind of, well, that's the end of that idea. Say, well, wait a minute, let's just really think about that. The second thing to do is to say, what's the chance of harming people if we maintain the status quo? And that's almost always a kind of a conversation stopper question, because no one ever challenges the harm that's going on in keeping the status quo. But if you come up with a new idea, now we want to know, look into harm. So let's make sure we're having a balanced assessment of that. The chance of harm in the status quo is pretty high, or isn't negligible. Let's not evaluate our new idea to a higher standard necessarily. It might actually be better. But I don't want to downplay the fact that there are some things where it is life or death, and those should be done in the normal sort of clinical trials kind of way, in a supervised, structured kind of way. But I find that most quality improvement, performance improvement projects are not life and death. The kinds of ideas really don't have high probabilities of harming people. And in fact, they might actually make it better than the status quo.
Great. Thanks, Paul. We have another question that popped up in the chat. So sometimes innovation requires the investment of some new dollars. How do we find what's written, quote, new money in the context of massive resource constraints, which is what of healthcare?
Yeah, and that's the classic question. What most other sectors do, what most other industries or sectors do, is to realize that if you want to progress, you have to invest in doing the next thing, and they hold aside a portion of the budget to say we're going to use this portion of the budget to try out new things. They have an innovation fund of some sort. Healthcare is highly constrained in some of these ways. So another approach that I see organizations taking is doing some waste elimination what are some things that we're now doing that actually we shouldn't be doing them at all, or we should do them in a very different way that would actually free up resource. And we can make a business case that says by perhaps investing a little bit in a technology or something, we're going to free up a resource, and the bottom line is going to be a payoff. If you're in a highly constrained situation like that, you might want to focus your innovation on things that would make care better, make the patient experience better, and would eliminate some of the waste, some of the unnecessary things that we do. Let's come up with some creative ideas around those sorts of things to begin to free up that resource. I also want to point out that it is sad. I've certainly seen it in the NHS in England, where they went through periods of time when they had additional resource, and they didn't use it to fundamentally innovate and fundamentally change some of the things they were doing. They just used up the resource doing what they were always doing. And then as the resources became more and more constrained, now they have the problem of, oh, we don't have any resources to invest in innovation. And it happens in industry after industry, company after company, organization after organization, that you don't know how good you got till it's gone. so start now, because resources are only going to get more constrained. Let's take what we have now and see if we can do something that will make the future different and better, so we're not constantly behind this resource ball.
Great, thanks for that, Paul. So recognizing that we're getting close to the end of our time, just want to thank you so much, Paul, for your insights on how to challenge us to be creative in our everyday work, and recognize that it is something that we should practice on a daily basis to work towards those innovations. Recognizing that we have a couple of unanswered questions within the chat, so thank you for posing them. We encourage you to segue those into the tweet chat that we have scheduled to start at 10:30. So just a reminder that Paul will also be interacting with folks via our tweet chat. We'll also just take a moment to encourage folks to complete the evaluation poll if you haven't had a chance to do so already. And with that, I think we'll segue into our tweet chat. So thank you so much, Paul.
Can I just make one more comment then Chelsea? If you download the slides, the first slide had my email address on it. If I've caused a question that I haven't answered, email me. I'm happy to reply via email to any questions. I want you to try to do some of these things. I want you to use them.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that invitation. Be prepared for an onslaught of emails, perhaps.
I may not respond instantly, but I will respond.
Perfect. So with that, we'll wish everyone a happy Friday. And for those of you joining us next week in Saskatoon for our event with Plsek, we'll see you there. And we encourage you to bring some of the insights that you've gleaned from today's webinar to that workshop as well. So thanks for joining, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.